Hey everybody, this is Raymond. Today we have a 8-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It helps the channel a lot. I really do appreciate it. Hopefully everybody got through all the weather in the last couple days. It's been a pretty crazy week from a weather perspective. I also wanted to say thank you guys for your support in the comments and the last few videos and stuff with loss of my dad. So I really do appreciate it. So let's go ahead and get in the slate. So we do have some weather issues. The Boston-Baltimore game has a pretty risky situation there. Toronto-Chicago White Sox does have a little bit of situation, but it doesn't look like it's going to be too much. Kansas City-Minnesota has a risky situation as well. I think both these games and these first two games, I think they end up playing, but there's definitely some uh, late start and play type of situations there. Then we'll look at the Dodgers and the Mets. This game also has some questionable weather, so we'll have to wait and see about a delay there. And then the Washington Atlanta game also does have some weather, but it looks like it'll be okay. So that's what we got. So lots of weather today, so hopefully it's not too crazy. So let's go ahead and look at pitchers. So pitching is kind of rough today as well. There's some good pitchers, but I think it's going to be a high-scoring bats day, assuming that we actually play all the games at least. So from our top pitchers, I'm going to look at Charlie Morton here for the Braves. He's got a very favorable match against Washington. Washington does not look good today at all, so I think he's a great option on the slate. He's been pitching pretty well for the most part. He doesn't need to have a monster game today in order to pay off either, because I don't think there's going to be any pitcher that's going to be completely, 25, 30 fantasy points or more. Then we'll look at Chris Bassett for Toronto. He's got a favorable matchup against the White Sox here, and so I do like him quite a bit. He's also nicely priced at $8,200. Strikeout rate is not as good as Morton, but he's definitely okay. So he is one of my top plays on the slate simply because of his potential to get over 20 fantasy points, which he's done in about half his games, and this is one of the best matchups he's had this season. So then we're going to look at, I should mention that he just played the White Sox. I forgot to say that. I think he scored 23 fantasy points last time out. Obviously, it's hard to replicate that kind of thing, but he's in play. As for GPP plays today, Joe Ryan looks fantastic today, though he does have a tougher matchup against Kansas City. Kansas City does have a couple of bats that I do like, but I do think that he's going to have a good game here. And he's fairly expensive, so you could go with Bassett and Morton, or you could use him instead of one of those two, and as a good option here. I also like Gavin Stone a little bit here for the Dodgers, though he does face a tougher matchup against the Mets. I do like a couple Mets bats, but I do think that he's been pretty inconsistent so far this season, but he does have some upside in this game. And so, like I said, the pitchers don't have to score 25 fantasy points today, and he's nicely priced at least, and he has a decent enough strikeout rate that has some potential. And then two lower value options here will be Justin Steele for the Cubs. Milwaukee is a team that can really get off and go, but they don't project particularly well today. He's also been very inconsistent this season, but he does have some upside if he pitches well here, though he probably will give up some earned runs. Looking at Cole Irvin for Baltimore, he is facing Boston, who does have some guys that can get some hits, but he's had some boom games so far this season, and the matchup here is actually pretty decent for him. But it is a little risky. I do like a couple of Boston, so those guys are kind of GPP slash extreme plays if you just need to save money. But I do think that they have some upside, and most of the other pitchers on the slate look like they're going to get rocked around. So it's not a great slate for pitching. Not only that, with all the weather, the pitching's even more concerning. So let's look at our catchers. Our top catcher here is going to be David Fry for Cleveland. He's very expensive today because of the way he's played and because he's in Colorado. So his price has come up $800, which is crazy. But he's hit the ball well. He's hitting 344 for the season. And he's got absolutely fantastic metrics for this game. This game, there's two games today that are going to have high ceilings, and that's going to be this game in Colorado between Cleveland and Colorado, and then the game with St. Louis and Cincinnati. In Cincinnati, both those parks, hitter parks. Those are also the last two games on the slate, so to keep that in mind. But David Fry is a fantastic play today. He's also available at catcher or outfield, so that gives some extra opportunity there to mix him in here. William Contreras for Milwaukee is in play, though he's a high-risk, high-reward play, as he's super expensive and he's facing a tougher situation. I don't love Justin Steele against the Milwaukee Brewers, but I do think that he's going to give them some problems. So I'm not sold that William Contreras is a great play, but he's definitely an okay play with his potential. Danny Jansen also jumps off the page today as a nice play. He's got absolutely fantastic metrics for this game, though he is in a tougher match. He is in a bit of an annoying situation being his price is $4,800. I would like him to be a lot cheaper. But the value play on the slate is Travis d'Arnaud at this position. He has good metrics here. He's hitting the ball pretty well, and Atlanta's hitting does need some now that Acuna's out. So it looks like he'll be one of the bigger factors going forward for this team. Looking at first baseman, Ohtani and Freddie Freeman obviously jump off the page a lot today. Ohtani has just been absolutely fantastic all season long so far. Freddie Freeman has been a little bit more inconsistent. He hasn't been particularly great recently, but he does draw good home run metrics for this game, so he's definitely looking as a decent option. Ryan O'Hearn for Baltimore looks absolutely fantastic today. He's been hitting the ball pretty well the last couple games, and his metrics are off the charts. He's a great value play on the slate. And then Patrick Wisdom is interesting today as he does look decent for the Cubs. I don't love the Cubs today, but I do think that they have some guys that have some hitting potential, and so he's one of them. Legging at second base, we'll look at Ozzy Albies at the top here. Now, he's struggled recently since he's been back from injury, but he's had a couple of good games the last four, so I think he's finally getting back on track, and he has absolutely fantastic metrics in this game. He's one of the top overall plays on this entire slate when it comes to those metrics, so he's definitely somebody you have to look at as a considerable option. I'm going to mix these two guys in here. Actually, I'm going to do it like this because I think Travis d'Arnaud also fits. Sorry about that, guys. This is just, I mean, you can't necessarily put all these expensive guys in, but I do think that they're valuable today. Other second baseman here, Edward Julian for Minnesota. He looks pretty good today. He's been inconsistent throughout the season, but the metrics today are good. He's the type of guy that you want to use when they look good and avoid when they don't. But he's in that situation today, so he's a pretty good play. Davis Schneider also looks really solid today, and he's $4,200. He's a really good price point for his upside today. He's been getting fantasy points in most games lately, so that's going to give us some opportunity. Then for third base here, we do like. Oh, at first base, I am sorry. I actually missed Paul Goldschmidt, who is just absolutely fantastic metrics today. He really has struggled so far this season, but he is starting to hit the ball pretty well the last few games, and so I think he's going to draw some absolute good metrics for this one in Cincinnati. Looking at third base now, Nolan Arenado. I knew I was like tripping on something. I was like, what the heck? At third base, Nolan Arenado looks absolutely fantastic for St. Louis today against Lodolo. Now, I do like Lodolo as a pitcher a little bit, but he is risky today as there's going to be home run potential in this game. And St. Louis actually does have some guys that can take advantage of that. Looking at Ryan McMahon for Colorado, his metrics are off the charts for this game. He's been really solid so far this season. He's actually been better on the road than at home, but the home run potential is just too good today for this game, and he's going to have some absolutely fantastic situation. Patrick Wisdom can also play at this position as well. Looking at shortstops, Ella De La Cruz is going to jump off the page today as he has absolutely good big time upside with his stolen base potential. And this game, as long as he can get on base, then he's going to have that potential today. He has had some struggles the last few games getting on base, but when he does, he usually tries to get some steals. He's been striking out a little bit though, so he's a little bit risky because of that price. Gunnar Henderson also, also extremely expensive today, but he does draw great metrics on this one. He's been hitting home runs like crazy lately, and he has some really good potential in this one for another one. And then a value play here is Dansby Swanson. Now, I don't love the Cubs, like I told you, but I do think that they have some potential today, and he definitely draws good metrics for this game, despite the fact that he's been pretty awful all season long. Looking at outfielders, Ohtani, obviously, who I already talked about, can play here. David Fry, who can play at catcher as well. Tyler Freeman Tyler Freeman. For Cleveland has really good potential today in Colorado. He has not been consistent so far this season, but he is hitting the ball better the last few games, and that does give us some potential in this one, especially in a hitter's ballpark. So I look for him to be a really good value play on the slate. Another guy that's a very cheap play is going to be Hurt Boys for Cincinnati. Now he has struggled some, but he's had some good games, and he's getting hits in all 4 of the last 4 games. He's also scored fantasy points quite a few games in a row now. And at $2,500, we just need to get him on the board so we can pay up into the positions. And he's a great spot to do that. Dylan Carlson, Dylan Carlson for St. Louis also looks pretty fantastic today. He's really struggled so far since he started back this season. He's played, a handful of games, I think about 15 at this point. Yep, so 15 games. He hasn't hit the ball very well, and he's only had 3 hits so far, but the metrics are really good today, so he's definitely somebody I'm going to consider putting in as a Hail Mary play. Jake Fraley looks really good for Cincinnati. Suzuki for the Cubs. Rodriguez for Cleveland. I think it's this, Jonathan Rodriguez. If he draws a start today, he's going to be a cheap value play that has some potential. He's only played 4 games so far, but he's managed to get some hits in the last 2 and 2 of the last 3 games, and he's scoring fantasy points, and he's nice and cheap. And he does draw absolutely fantastic metrics for this game. Brendan Doyle for the Colorado Rockies looks okay today. Will Benson has been a really good player for fantasy at times, and he looks fantastic today. I think Varsho is a good secondary play for Toronto. Probably a sneaky stack there in Toronto. Springer also, is looking decent there, and he's underpriced today. O'Hearn, who can also play at first base. O'Hearn. How? Ryan. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Can't type. And then Max Kepler as well for this position. So let's look at our sub $3,000 plays, and then we will get to your stacks. So our sub 3,000 guys are going to be following a bunch of guys that we've already talked about a little bit, but we'll go through them here. So Herta Boys for Cincinnati is the top overall sub 3,000 place play. He's had some decent games, and he's going to have some upside today at home. Dylan Carlson, who I also mentioned in outfield, can be at just $2,000. If he does anything, he can pay off here. Jake Cave looks interesting from Colorado as a Hail Mary play, and Manzardo for Cleveland at first base is a nice little cheap $3,000 play. Pedro Pages, if he draws the start for the St. Louis Cardinals, then he would be somebody at catcher that you can mix in. And then also Jason Hayward for the Dodgers has some upside at just $3,000. Let's look at our stacks here. Sorry if I've been a little bit inconsistent on this one today. It's a little bit, I'm still dealing with some stuff. So let's look at these stacks here. These stacks look really solid on the slate. I think Cleveland is the top overall stat, and you can kind of get cheap with it too, because you got Fry, Freeman, Jimenez, Rodriguez, and then either Josh Naylor or Manzardo. I think this is a very good stack. It's the best overall stack on the slate. But we do have a lot of mid-range stacks here, and with Atlanta being obviously they don't have, I can't spell Albies today. They don't have Acuna now that he's out with the torn ACL. So Albies, Ozuna, Olsen, Darno, and then either Arcia or Duvall. You could really, if you wanted to take out Olsen and put in Arcia and Duvall, you can definitely do that, assuming those guys ends up in the starting lineup. But I think that that's a pretty solid stack today, and it's not as expensive now that Acuna is out. For Colorado, McMahon, Doyle, Bochard, Diaz, and Blackman, I think this is going to be a really good stack today. Though I think that the back one in Blackman is probably the hardest one to consider. But the top 4 guys all look really solid, so I think you could do a 4-player stack with that team. For Toronto, Vlad Jr., Varsho, Jensen, and then either Springer, Bichette, or Snyder. You can use 2 of the back 3. I really like Bichette and Snyder, but I also like Springer, so it's hard to really determine which one to use. For Cincinnati, De La Cruz, Herta Boys, Fraley, Benson, and then India or Steer. This is actually a pretty cheap stack today, surprisingly, despite De La Cruz being expensive. For Baltimore, I think this is going to be a sneaky stack because they really do jump off the page today with Henderson, O'Hearn, Rutschman, Mullins, and in either Santander or Westberg. I am leaning Santander there. For the Dodgers, Ohtani, and then Freeman or Betts, but I like Freeman better, clearly. Hayward, Lux, and Pages. I think that's actually a pretty good stack today. For Minnesota, Julian, Kepler, Larnach, Buxton, and then Kirilloff, or you could go with Castro if you wanted. A nice cheap stack, and it looks really solid on the slate. The St. Louis stack does not project all that great, but it does have some popular options here, so it's definitely worth a look. Goldie, Carlson, Arenado, the top overall 3, and if Pages gets in the lineup, then he's a viable option. I didn't really love anybody else, but Newbar and Donovan do have some upside on the slate. These bottom stacks are really kind of rough. These are where a lot of our pitching that we do like is coming from, and these games, teams are going to be tough today. But for the Mets, I think this is probably a rough slate, rough stack for them. For Milwaukee, I do like this stack a little bit, but it's high risk, high reward. For Boston, that's kind of similar. It doesn't really jump off the pages all that great. For the Cubs, these are a pretty sneaky stack. I felt like a lot of the Cubs do match up well here. And so it's definitely a stack that I think that is good for kind of a Hail Mary situation. And then these bottom 3 in Chicago White Sox, Kansas City, and Washington, these are just nicely avoidable. Even though Kansas City does have a little bit of potential, I think these are pretty avoidable stacks in general. So thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments, questions, feel free to